Hey everyone, it's Christopher Paolini again, and I'm here today with the awesome Delilah Dawson. Hi Delilah.
Hey, what's up?
Well, just sitting here hoping to talk to you and get some interesting answers.
I have a few.
Awesome. So now why don't you tell our viewers a little bit about yourself? What have you done? Who are you? Why are we talking?
Okay, I'm Delilah S. Dawson. I'm a writer. I guess I am probably at this moment best known for Star Wars Phasma, which is out on Friday. I've also done a couple short stories for them, The Perfect Weapon and Scorched. I have the Blood series, which is a fantasy vampire circus romance series. I have the Hit series, which is a teen mercenary in a bank-owned America series that is currently a little bit too close to where we are. A single book called Servants of the Storm about demons in Savannah, and then the Wake of Vultures series, the Shadow series, written under a pen name Lila Bowen, which is also me. Then a variety of short stories, comics. I have a comic called Lady Castle that's about that old Monty Python quote, strange women, lions, and ponds, distributing swords is a bad system for government. And it's like, yeah, but what if it was an okay system of government? As well as some Adventure Time comics.
Wow, that's a lot of stuff. And full disclosure, I have The Wake of Vultures right here, and you were kind enough to sign this for me at, what was it, Denver Comic Con, right?
Mm-hmm. That was a great con.
Yeah, it was. For any author who happens to be listening to this, I highly recommend Denver Comic Con. It was a lot of fun. They did a great job organizing it for authors. So, with all of those projects, how do you manage your time? I mean, and the deadlines and everything else. I mean, that's pretty crazy. I've only ever worked on one project at a time, so how are you managing that?
Well, I am not an organized person. I definitely have to hack most of my workflow to make sure what happens on time, and I've never missed a deadline so far. So apparently, you can be disorganized and an author working on multiple spider-webbed fronts. But I always put things on my calendar. I do a daily to-do list of bullets that move over if I don't finish them. And also knowing ahead of time when a deadline is going to be unrealistic and being able to push back and be like, okay, that's kind of it's a bit much. Let's talk about how to change that so that we still hit our whenever it has to get to marketing and sales, but everybody's still happy with the end product.
Well, there are some deadlines that are negotiable and some deadlines that aren't negotiable, especially with like a big licensed property, I would imagine. So speaking of which, so you, as he's mentioned, you've done the Star Wars stuff. How do you find something in the story that excites you and you're passionate about when you're having to work within such a tight framework of an established property like that?
Well, I haven't had a problem with it yet. My first IP project was right when they were starting the Amazon Kindle Unlimited. They commissioned me to write a story about Shadow Man by Valiant Comics. At the time, I'd never heard of Shadow Man, so I made an emergency run to the comic book store and bought every Shadow Man comic they had. Within 3 days, I was an expert on what they had until that time and was able to write, I think it was a 23,000 word story in 9 days.
Wow.
So it's fast stuff when you do IP, but at the same time, you can look at this character and I don't know, it's almost like when you're tasting a meal you really like, little flavors will jump out at you. That even when you take on something as a whole that's established, you can find little things to love in it. I always tell people, when you're writing, you have to find something to love in every scene, or the readers can tell that moment when they get bored and it's like, we are in a car and you're just making us listen to people talk in a car, that you've got to find something to laugh at, something that tears at your heart, something in the scene that makes it exciting, or the reader can tell how bored you are. So for Star Wars especially, like for The Perfect Weapon, they showed me, all I had was this picture of this character, Bazine Natal, and the brief was super brief, and it was basically female James Bond in space. So I went upstairs and watched all of the James Bond movies in one day, and watched some Bourne, and watched I think Kingsman might have just come out, but yeah. So it was a matter of looking at those and seeing what I liked in the movies and what I found exciting and how I could fit that into their story and their framework. And also whatever I've done recently pops into my head. And that one, I'd been at Gen Con, and Gwen Pearson had taken me, Chuck Wendig, Max Gladstone, and Stephen Blackmore to the Purdue University Bug Barn. And we'd gotten this firsthand tour of all of their freaky, nasty, weirdo bugs. We saw the ant gladiatorial arena. We saw the orange tarantula that they can't even identify, that shoots poison spears out of its feet, so they have to wear a full hazmat suit with a diamond mask. And so, like, you can see in several of my books where these weird bug facts that I learned at the bug barn have come into play. And the perfect weapon is one because, like, you come out of there and you're like, oh God, I have to use this. So it's, it's finding the things you like. And Phasma, we can't say a lot yet, but I've mentioned that the Mad Max Fury Road soundtrack was a big part of that playlist.
Mm.
And so people read, have heard me say that and read the blurb for it and been like, okay, this is going to be Mad Max in Star Wars.
I absolutely loved Mad Max Fury Road. I think that was just an awesome movie. So out of the Bond films, which one was your favorite one?
I really liked Skyfall for one because it kind of had a more classical three act sort of. You could settle into each act, and Skyfall was just so beautiful and evocative, and I loved Dame Judi Dench is like this old lady who's like, whatever, I'm going down with the ship. But one of the most important parts for me was seeing finally, after like watching James Bond for 30 years, finally seeing that the only way that you can live that life is if you are on a ton of uppers, downers, painkillers. You see him injecting himself. I have chronic illness and I live with people with chronic pain. And it meant so much to see a character where you're like, yes, a 45-year-old man's body cannot do this. Like you
Yeah.
have to support this with chemicals. You can't just jump up and be James Bond and jump off the back of the train and shoot your cuffs unless you're on like 7 rounds of Percocet. So yeah, I loved the reality of that one and the gruffness of it and the beauty of Skyfall itself was so nice, I thought too.
It's like I remember reading something by some fitness trainer who did the math and said that if you really wanted to be Batman, with all the training you would have to do and everything else, you could be Batman for about 1 year in your life. And then you're not going to be at your physical peak, and you're probably physically destroyed from the experience.
Yeah, no, like this thing that Hugh Jackman does, they just don't show him the rest of the year where he just kind of like lays there going, oh God, and drinking milkshakes.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so you mentioned writing that story. You said was it 23,000 words in 9 days? Did I get
Yeah.
that right? 9 days. So are you generally a fast writer then, or is that sort of an anomaly for you?
Oh no, I'm super fast. Most of my first drafts, my shortest first draft took me 14 days. That was Servants of the Storm, which it also was my longest revision. It took me 6 months to revise that book, and it's the only revision that's ever like, I actually had to just stop and cry one day because I couldn't fit it together. And then, but they're usually 1.5 months to 3 months
For the first draft?
for the first draft. But my first drafts are fast, dirty word vomit. I don't self-judge. I don't backtrack. I don't lay awake thinking about paragraphs. It's one and done, and then I fix it later.
What do you attribute your ability to do that? Because of course, plenty of authors can't, and I'll count myself among that group as well. You know, a lot more of the obsession and the struggle to get that first draft, and I think probably that approach is, you're trying to get it right the first time around, so that really slows you down.
No, I don't even try that. The first time I ever tried to write a book, I was in my 20s, and I had this idea for a story. Got into the first paragraph and stopped because I couldn't decide on the color of her eyes. And when I was like, I guess maybe 24, I was like, this was really important. If I got the eye color wrong, then the errors would ripple down, the book would suck. And so I never got past the first paragraph. And it was like, it was so disheartening. I actually don't think I would have been able to write a book until my second kid, my son, he stopped sleeping when he was 9 months old. And I was getting about 3 hours of sleep a night. And I got pretty dark. I started hallucinating. And I went to my husband, who's a psychologist, and was like, just off the cuff here, do you hear voices in the walls? Because I think the rats might be up to something. And he was like, he's a psychologist. He was like, number one, let's get you a sleep schedule. And number two, you need a hobby. You need something to channel your anxiety and strangeness into and something to think about at night because your brain, left alone, gets into trouble with rats. So that's where my first book came from, was me needing an outlet for this. So it's like obsession, compulsion, anxiety, depression. Like I've always had trouble going to sleep at night because I just lay there and my brain spins and spins and spins. And now I have something to chew on, and it's so much better. I solve a lot of problems by mulling over them as I go to sleep. And when I wake up, I'm like, oh yeah, I got that.
You don't feel that mulling it over as you're falling asleep keeps you up even longer?
It does, and it doesn't. I've gotten into the habit of turning on a comforting TV show when I go to sleep, Community or Bob's Burgers or The Venture Brothers, something like that I've watched 1,000 times. And it's like I'll loop until I get sleepy enough, and then I just tune out listening to their words. Um, So yeah, it's all about hacking your anxiety.
I was doing something similar. I was listening to Bryce Dead Revisited, narrated by Jeremy Irons as an audiobook as I was falling asleep. Because he has such a wonderful, soothing voice that worked well.
Uncle Scar was telling you stories.
That's right. That's right. I'm just laughing and grimacing at the same time listening to you to talk about this because I just sent the manuscript for my newest book back to my agent. Thank you. But before I sent it off, I spent a day and a half obsessing over the name of not even a minor character, like a secondary character that really does not matter to the whole book, but I felt like I couldn't send the manuscript until that name was perfect, and I couldn't find a perfect name. I finally had to just bite the bullet and say, you know what, this is me being anxious about sending the manuscript more
Yeah.
than it is about finding the right name.
That's why God made Find and Replace.
Oh man, but the problem is I replaced the name like 4 times.
Oh man, the first time I ever did that on a book, I changed the name from Jimbo to Tom, and I forgot to do the whole cases only. So instead of stomping people, we're Sajimboing, and instead of an atomic bomb, it was a Sajimbo bomb. Oh man, you can get in trouble.
Yeah, yeah. So I always ask authors this, and this is one of my favorite questions to ask. But with all the stories that you've written and all the stories you want to write, have you found that is there like a certain theme that you keep returning to? It doesn't have to even be a theme, an image, a feeling, a character, and if so, what would that be?
I've got several that I notice. I mean, they're like little epiphanies where one day you're like, oh, that's interesting that's in every single book. Violent women seems to be the theme tying all of mine together. Violent dark women. um, but I also like alligators have popped up a few times. Broken women who have suffered some kind of tragedy in their backstory, but definitely not as a. And I've seen some books that use women's tragedy as a convenient shorthand for here, feel sorry for this woman, and I like to use it as a convenient shorthand for look how this woman is making herself even stronger than she was before and is coming to kill you.
Well, that was one thing I liked about Mad Max Fury Road is that the backstories of the various women, if you actually think about it, they've all been abused probably pretty horribly over the course of their
Oh
lives,
yeah.
and yet the story doesn't dwell on it, and it shows them being empowered and living their lives, but not being. We know they've been victims, but we don't see them being victims, and I think that makes a big difference to the storytelling.
Well, yeah, it doesn't fetishize the victimization. It just recognizes that it's one of the many foundations of what makes a person who they are.
So how do you go about constructing a story then? Are you a seat of your pants writer, or do you like to really nail everything down before you put pen to paper?
For a while now, most of my work has been within a series or within an IP. But in general, I have some kind of a story seed, whether it's something I've come up with or that's been given to me. And the first thing I do is go on Spotify and build a playlist. It's not songs that say what the book is, or it's not word based. It's more the feeling of songs. Um, so if you go on Spotify under Delilah S. Dawson for every one of my books, you can see kind of the feeling of it. Phasma is mainly like I said, Mad Max Fury Road, Force Awakens soundtrack, Rogue One soundtrack, and then some Foster the People. Kill the Farm Boy that I'm writing with Kevin Hearn is all kind of very kind of sparkly alt pop. But I build a playlist of 20 or 30 songs, and then I listen to it obsessively while I'm driving, especially is where I do a lot of my kind of cogitation. But I'll also listen to it like when I'm just hanging out in the house, doing laundry or whatever. But I basically want to be behaviorally conditioned to be in that world when I hear that music. And that way, if I have to switch projects or dive in and out of a project, as soon as I put on that first song, my brain dives right back into the world. And so while I'm doing that, I have to come up with the beginning, the instigating factor that kicks everything off, the main conflict and a couple of sub conflicts, the climax, the ending, and the kind of denouement or where it's headed in the theme. So when I have all of that stuff and I know the main character fairly well, that's when I start writing. Um, so basically, it's a lot like a road trip. If I said I wanted to get from where I live to the Grand Canyon, I don't want to know every single road, every single stop, every single hotel. I want to know the 5 places I'm going to stop on the way there, and then leave organic growth for great adventures in between here and there. But I still want to make sure that I end up at the Grand Canyon and not at say Niagara Falls. So it's a controlled fall, but yeah. So I leave a lot of it up to my subconscious and to the general synchronicity of life and things kind of happening when they need to. And thus far, it has not let me down.
So what are some of the areas you find you often have trouble then with consistently? Because I certainly know there are areas I always put my foot wrong with, and I'm guessing that's true for most people.
I've gotten it pretty down for the first draft. I used to stall out every now and then, and when I would stall out, I would realize that if I moved back one or two beats, there was a point where instead of the main character and agency driving the plot, I, as the writer, would have been like, "Oh, I want you to do this," or "This is what I would have done," and I can look and see the moment where the main character's misstep took the plot down the wrong route, where I'll have to back up a little bit. But that hasn't happened in quite some time. But that used to be a major thing, was, making sure that the characters are driving the plot and that you're doing callbacks to the motivation of why they're doing what they're doing versus just letting boulders fall out of the sky and hit them. I want them to pull the twig that makes the boulder fall out of the sky and hit them.
So their flaws are the cause of their own problems and downfalls.
Yes. Yeah. I want the world to uniquely challenge the person, not for me as the god to shove the world into their way. The world should be actively damaging them. But these days, it's like my first draft is fast and dirty. My second draft immediately follows it, so I can kind of make the face match the butt, because by the time I finished it, there's all this stuff at the front end that I didn't know that I need to weave in or seed or check off. But I always need to, usually in the third or fourth draft, really hammer down the emotion where, it's driving like a movie plot, but you have to really kind of stab them in the heart. You can't just tell them about the steak. You've got to make them feel the pain. So that's always like a later layer. So I don't know if it's so much a mistake as a thing that I know will happen in later drafts. And sometimes I actually need my editor or agent to point out like, hey, I really want to feel this more. And I'm like, thank you, I'm a robot.
It's interesting how you're going about that. So do you find, as you're talking about, like you said, the layers that you're going through with each draft, first draft is just getting it down.
Well, it's like painting. It's oil painting. It's fat over lean.
Oh, I love that description.
I build up the fat, and you don't get the opaque glints of gold until the very last layer.
So let me see if I can word this properly. So sometimes I've seen a lot of first drafts from a lot of different authors, and I've seen some authors who they will sort of go the approach of first draft. They will slather lots and lots of emotion in the first draft, and then actually what they're doing is chipping that back because the first time around it's too melodramatic. It's like they're sobbing onto the page with every yes exactly. It's over dramatic from start to finish, and you're sort of coming at that from the opposite end of it's a little leaner and stripped down the first time, and then you figure out exactly what you need by the end.
Yeah, definitely.
Interesting. And how much research do you do? Now I read The Wake of Vultures, of course, and it's set in the American West, and I live in the West. I'm up north, and this is set quite a bit further south, but it's not that different from where I live. And it seemed to me you got a lot of the details just dead on with, horses and what it's like being outside and all of that. So, and of course it's set in the 1800s?
Yeah, mid-1800s.
Mid-1800s. So how much research did you go about, or is that just life experience you already had?
I probably should do more research, but I prefer experiential research. When I wrote the Wake of Vultures book so far, up until recently, I've had a horse, and so, I've been trail riding is my favorite thing to do out in the woods. So like Earl, the character of Earl who comes around in book 2 is because I was stuck behind this donkey on a trail. And I was like, oh my God, Earl, the only person that hates you more than my horse is me, Earl. So like that's a character now in book 2. But yeah, so a lot of it is horses, especially. I feel like if you're going to write about horses, and especially about being on them for extended periods of time, like you need to experience that and know what happens if you don't loosen your girth. Know what happens if you let your horse drink too deeply at the stream where it rings untrue. I tried to write about an area of Texas I'd actually been in, so that I knew what it smelled like and what certain things looked like as compared to other areas I hadn't been in. I, looked at maps online, but it's part of the fun of an alternative history is just screwing with history in ways that, it's like I said, I'm not super organized. I'm not that person that has family trees and detailed maps and pages and pages of stuff. I'm very natural, subconscious, off the cuff, and it just kind of happens. And so I know I make mistakes, but it's a made up world. Who wouldn't? But in one of my books, I had someone on the trapeze, and so I went and took trapeze classes. And in other books, I try to do the things so that it rings true.
Mm-hmm.
I remember when I was writing my romance series, reading a book where a virgin was met her hero on a bed of hay in a hovel and being like, you've lost me. You've lost me. I can't trust you from here on out because you've never sat on straw with your bare butt, dude. So everything you say is heresy as far as I'm concerned. So I want things to ring true. But like in book 2 of Wake of Vultures, there is a railroad involved. And so I was so lucky. I emailed a railroad museum and got an intern that answered all my questions, no matter how, where I was like, okay, tell me really, Missy, where do people poop when they're working on a railroad? She's like, well, the bad news is anywhere. So, I've got that going. But yeah, a lot of it is made up and patched together, except for horses, because horses you got to get right.
Well, but the story has to take precedence always, and it's that balancing act between making it believable but not compromising the reality, but not compromising the story either.
Well, I think it also has to do with your audience. There are some people that really, I used to say this about steampunk. If you're reading it for the science, you don't want my books. Like, I don't know why that smoke is purple. I was just like, it would look great as purple smoke. So, if you're reading it, it depends on what your reader is looking for, and your book won't be for all readers, and all readers won't love your book. And I'm okay with that.
Do you consciously pitch your books toward different ages or different readerships?
I do, but I get it wrong. I thought Wake of Vultures was a young adult. It's very centered on Nettie and very voicey, and it's sold as an adult fantasy. And I was like, okay, that's fine.
Huh.
Oh, you know what else I did? While I was writing it, in the background, I would have Lonesome Dove or Hell on Wheels or Deadwood playing constantly in the background. So it was almost like I could look out the window and kind of see the place I was writing about. So that was like cheap research of like, yeah, I'm there. That's what the hotel looks like.
Yeah, brain hacks, as you said. So why did with Wake of Vultures? Why are you writing under a pseudonym now?
Up until that point, everything I had was with Simon and Schuster. The Blood series, Servants of the Storm, Hit. All of that was with Simon and Schuster. And so when Orbit Hachette bought Wake of Vultures, it was a different genre, a different voice, a different publisher. I think it was that whole marketing dollars contributing to our opposition, I guess. But I write so many various things. I always assumed I'd had a pseudonym, so it didn't bother me. It didn't bother my ego. I already had one picked out, and they're like, "Oh, that was easy. We thought you'd be insulted." And I'm like, "No, I don't care."
How'd you go about picking your alter ego?
I picked Lila because if you call it in a crowded room, I'll look up. It sounds like Delilah, so I'm very lazy. I don't have to memorize another name. And Bowen is an old family name from my hometown. It was like you can go to the old cemeteries and see it in a bunch of old cemeteries. So I always like the sound of it.
So tell me something that you wished you knew when you were starting out as an aspiring author. If you could go back in time and tell yourself, some piece of advice, what would that be?
That books don't randomly find success. I used to, I remember with my first book thinking, I don't know, maybe it'll hit lists and get made into a movie. Maybe that'll happen. I don't know. And you're like, no, honey. Unless you're putting in major money or your publisher really wants to get it somewhere, most books will not be wild successes. And most organic growth is organically driven by a lot of manure and herbicide. These things are not random. Books do not randomly be wildly successful.
So your belief is that the marketing really drives a lot of the sales? There's
a lot of different components. I don't think marketing helps a lot. Your platform /brand /audience /friends. There's the time of the year that if you hit a trend or start a trend, there's so many different factors. But just that I didn't realize that 99% of books just do okay. I think at that point in time, they were saying that most books sell less than 300 books over their entire lifetime. And now, they're saying, most books never sell 1,000 books over their lifetime. But yeah, just that concept of there's work behind that, whether it's you, I know you did so much work behind your books to get them out there, more than most of us have ever done, whether it's work that you do yourself, work that you pay a PR company to do, work that your publisher does. Most people do not have a first book just randomly shoot straight through the roof. And the ones who do are like fire slugs that burn the trail behind them. You cannot follow in their path. You cannot replicate their path. It only happens once.
When I was starting out, I remember reading a statistic in the writers I want to say it was either the Writer's Handbook or the Writer's Market, if you're familiar with either of those.
Oh
I
yeah.
don't know if they're still published, but they were great, great resources for
Yeah, the
any.
writer's market used to be like this thick, and you'd get it and be like,
Yeah,
oh, this is amazing.
and it was great because it told you how to submit to agents, how to submit to publishers, what sort of books the agents represented, so forth and so on. But they made the point that it was something like the average book advance was like $5,000, and most books did not earn out their advance. And of course, that average is not the real world figures, because in the real world, it gets all collected by some of the you get all the big advances, chew up most of the cash, and then, on the lower end, you don't get a whole lot at all. So yeah, it's definitely hard. I agree. And the hardest part, I think, is that you spend all that time working on a book. I mean, it could be years and years, and then hey, you got a $5,000 advance, and 2 weeks later you're in the remainder bin.
Well, but and also the understanding that like you can write a great book and it might not go anywhere, or you might write a great book and find an agent and a publisher, and it might never find its audience. Like that, how well a book does on various lists does not mean that it's better or worse than other books. It has to do with so many factors outside of straight up quality or how good the book is. Like I teach classes at Lit Reactor, and I get so many questions. And I remember these questions too, where you're like, I just want to know if it's good. And you just get to the point where you're like, good is not the thing that matters. It can be good or it can be okay. There's always work to do, but it's a very complicated soup.
And there is a certain base level of quality you do have to have, I think.
But I also see a lot of people who spend 16 years on their first book and think it's going to be a breakout. And you don't get that. They don't necessarily understand that, like most of us who have traditionally published books, the one that got published is not our first book. That's a sample size of one is Pat Rothfuss, and the rest of us, it's our third or fourth book. And when we look back, it's not our best book.
When I wrote Aragon, I wrote it with the express intention of writing it and abandoning it to immediately write something else as soon as I finished it. I never intended to try to pursue it all the way to publication, because I just thought that the chances of that were just not even possible. And even like with Pat, he worked on that first book and the rest of the books in that series for years and years, and he kept rewriting it and reworking it and getting it to the point where it was ready for publication. So it's not like he did it and then just sat on the work.
What I say when I teach is, in general, like you're better off writing 5 or 6 books than spending 16 years on one book, because you're going to be developing new skills and leveling up with each book, as compared to hacking away at the same piece of marble forever trying to find your David. Like, no, go get 10 pieces of marble and just get an axe.
Well, because also once you write something, it sort of it freezes it. It solidifies the idea and your skill at that moment, and there's only so much you can fix after the fact without like rewriting from scratch.
Well, and it's not fun.
No.
There's an energy and excitement and a hope. It's about hope. Like when you're querying, I always say, once you start querying, start writing your next book. So all of your eggs aren't in that basket. Your eggs are in this new basket. And you're like, who cares if you reject the old book, because the new book is the new hotness, and that's whatever. And it helps take off that terror of rejection.
So that raises the question, how did you get published initially?
Slush. I'm a slush baby.
Really?
Yep. I wrote my first book. It was a highly flawed kind of chick lit women's fiction about a woman who went to Greece and accidentally slept with Zeus. It was terrible. It's terrible. I showed them my first chapter, the first draft of my first chapter in my Lit Reactor class, because I'm like, I want you to see how bad writing can be, and you can still get published within 2 or 3 years if you can really commit to self-improvement. But I queried it, got, I think, 57 rejections. Were kind enough to tell me, hey, you've got some chops, but this book is fatally flawed. It cannot be fixed. You should write something else and send it to us. And so I trunked it and I wrote the next book.
And how did that make you feel, hearing that?
When they explained the fatal flaw to me and I looked at the book, it's like you get that bonus where, like, number one, an agent spoke to me and they said I had chops, and they said they would read something else. I don't know. At this point, it's like I was still trying to recover from that sleep deprivation, but my brain had fundamentally changed. I don't know if it was the lack of sleep for that long, or they say that when you have, getting into science here, they say that when a woman carries a son, that blood crosses the blood-brain barrier and she gets Y chromosomes in her brain for the first time. I don't know which of those is true, but I fundamentally changed as a human being. I went from being very risk-averse to being like, whatever, I don't care. I'll make a fool out of myself. I'll keep getting rejected. I don't care. I got like infinite books I can write. This is a quiver of arrows, so whatever. So it didn't hurt as much. So, whereas a couple years ago, I'd have been devastated to not get an A plus on everything I did. I get this from these two agents in the same week, and I'm like, it's not my fault. It's fatally flawed. Past me did that. I'm going to write the new book. And it was like, it was freeing because I was like, oh, okay. I can stop banging my head against the wall. They said, query them again. I'm going to write this new book and query them again. So it was very freeing. And the next book got my agent. And then, so that book, we took it out on sub. It went 2 rounds.
Just to step back a half step, how did you get the agent? Did you submit to agencies?
Yeah, I just straight queried agents that I found on Query Tracker and Agent Query. And then I stalked them on Twitter and looked at their websites and queried widely. I have this whole big blog post on how I got published called, if you look up 25 Steps to Being a Traditionally Published Writer, Lazy Bastard Edition. Mm-hmm. It's on Chuck Wendig's blog, so it's pretty not safe for work. But it tells every step of the way with what I wish I'd seen back then. So yeah, I just queried her with a regular query for it was a middle grade adventure about rats that talk in the walls. And so she took me on as a client. I had 2 offers of representation. And then I chose this agent because she repped a wide variety of stuff, whereas the other agent did children's only. And I was already starting the book that would become Wicked as They Come, which is my first published book. So I knew that, if I queried her with a middle grade and I was writing what I thought then was just a steampunk fantasy, that I would need the agent that did adult stuff too. So she took the middle grade on submission, and we found an editor that really liked it. I did 3 revise and resubmits over a year and a half, and then she finally rejected it. And reading it now, I know why. The main character was kind of a cardboard cutout. I was still in that stage of writing where you're afraid of making a character too character-y, because then what if people can't relate? Mm-hmm. And I look at it now, and I see that it's fatally flawed, and that the character being kind of a blancmange was the flaw. But by then, I was already working on the next book, which is Wicked as They Come, which we sold in a 3-book series at auction between 4 houses. And so it's I wrote the first book in 2009, queried it, wrote the second book in 2009, queried it, got an agent in early 2010, sold the first book in 2011. The book came out in 2012. Mm-hmm. So it was a pretty quick, as far as people go, it was a pretty quick ramping up.
So it was about 3 years from start to finish?
I mean, 3 years from writing the first book to that first book on the shelf at Barnes & Noble.
That actually doesn't entirely surprise me, because I definitely think that if someone has even the slightest bit of aptitude for something, if you spend 3 solid years working on it, and I do mean solid 3 years working consistently on it, trying to get better, you're either going to get substantially better, or you're going to realize it's just not the profession for you and you should try something else.
Well, I mean, you've got, Malcolm Gladwell's and Macklemore's 10,000 Hours, Stephen King's 1 million words. Mm-hmm. I got really obsessive. It kind of became my Prozac, where the worse I felt, the more I poured myself into the writing, the better I felt. So, yeah, it's... and I also, because I had lost whatever made me so risk averse and made me so dedicated to getting A's. I was an AP student. I was, honor scholarship to college, whatever. I was terrified of not getting an A, but whatever happened in writing, I stopped caring about failure and just threw myself into stuff, even if I failed. Mm-hmm. And I think that helped a lot. I don't think I could have done this when I was 18 or 24. I don't think I could have done this till I was 31.
Interesting. So what are your long-term goals with the writing? What can fans of yours expect?
Take over the world.
Take over the world.
No, I mean, I writing a Star Wars book was, I thought, the highest I could get, and I'm there. So it's kind of crazy. No, I mean, I'd really like to hit list and see what that feels like. I would love to see something I made into a movie or a TV show and be able to actually look and see this on a screen and sit in a movie theater. That'd be really cool. But I know that you don't always get that. I'm writing this book with Kevin Hearn right now called Kill the Farm Boy that went to auction and was kind of a big deal and is the biggest, one of the biggest books of my career. Insofar as, they really care, the publisher's majorly behind it. I know Star Wars is majorly behind it, but, of that is this book with him that's coming out next year that I'm super jazzed about. But also I just like doing new things. I don't like being bored. So I love doing the comics. I would love to like pitch some TV scripts. I'd like to try new things and see what happens.
We haven't even talked about the comic books any, but I'm curious, how does that differ from the novel writing in your experience?
Oh, I had to ramp up on that so fast. That's one of those jump in the water and then figure out how to swim. I was on a panel at Gen. Okay, so I said on Twitter I wanted to write comics, which gets you nothing, literally nothing. But kindly, someone was like, "Oh, well, we have this anthology. It's not paid, but if you write a 6-page script, we'll get somebody to draw it for you, and then you'll have something on your CV." And I was like, "Oh yeah." So I did that. It was about a carousel. Carousels are another one of those themes that comes up in my books. And so I finally had like a comic script, and then I wrote one for them the next year. It's with the Boo anthology, which is now its own. It was with Monkey Brain, but Monkey Brain closed. So because of those two little forays, I got to be on a panel at Gen Con that was called Writing Comics for Women, when they realized at the last moment that there were no women on it. And they freaked out, and they asked me to do it. And I was like, I don't have a lot of experience, but I can go up there and take abuse. So it was really cattywampus. The Mary Sue covered it. It went very badly because the person running the comics panel did not want it to be about women writing comics, but rather how men can write comics for women, which you can imagine would not go over well.
Oh, geez, I heard about that. That was you on that panel?
Yeah, so if you Googled the Mary Sue Gen Con Women in Comics, you'll see me and Alina Pete and also Gene Ha and Chris Roberson were amazing about it, and Jim Zub. God, these guys are amazing, but it got really crazy. I've never been on a panel where the moderator actively hated the audience and the panelists. But the next day I got an email from Boom saying like, "Hey, would you like to pitch a women-friendly comic?" And so I emailed Jim Zub and was like, oh God, what? But Jim Zub, Jimzub, is a really helpful guy who puts some of his comic scripts online. You go to his website and he'll tell you how to pitch, how to detail pitch, how to character pitch. And so in like 3 or 4 days, I read everything on his site about pitching and came up with pitch documents. And it was like, yeah, I know what I'm doing, whatever, this is fine. And it took about a year. So it's like that was in July of 2015. And then the comic came out. They accepted it after about a year, and it came out in 2016. Wow. It's called Lady Castle.
Lady Castle. So how much control do you have over the actual images? I mean, in your script, are you basically describing every single panel, or are you leaving a lot of that up to the artist?
So this is only my first one, and it's creator owned. So it's like at the beginning, I had a ton of input. I got to help pick the illustrator, the artist, because I was real adamant that it be a woman of color. Like, I don't need a dude on this, and I don't need 2 white ladies. So that was great because they agreed completely, and everybody they pitched was in that realm. So it's Ashley Woods, and I got to be really involved in creating the characters. I'd originally thought it would be more of a kind of cutesy, adorable butts kind of Nimona / Lumberjanes thing, but Ashley's drawings elevated it to a much more dramatic art form where I was like, oh God, I've got to be a better writer to justify these characters because they're going to have real lines and not just be shaking their cute butts. So it was really a challenge, but my editorial team was really scripts. You can find comic scripts online, and I think it's called like the Comic Archive or the Comic Script Archive, but like Kelly Sue DeConnick scripts for Bitch Planet helped a lot, where you can see how much or how little they describe. So my first script, I think, was like 80 pages. I was so descriptive because it was the first time we saw the castle. I had like maps and layouts. It was the first time we saw the backgrounds. Like, it was the first time I was describing her 2-headed pet albino snake. So it was really, but as the artist and I got to understand each other, the scripts got smaller and smaller because we developed shorthand. She knew what the village looked like, and I knew I could trust her. Mm-hmm. So I think my last script was more like 40 pages, like half as short, half as long.
That almost sounds like serial television writing, where after the pilot, the writers will establish a real shorthand because everyone's working on the same project. Everyone knows what they're talking about. You don't have to say exactly what the set looks like because,
yeah.
People know what the set looks like.
And Adventure Time, like, I think it was the same way because my script, and Adventure Time and Labyrinth, where you're just like, we know this world, you and me. We know this world real good. So I can be like, oh, this is the face that Finn made, and tell me a story. And he's like, oh, I know which face that is.
So how long does it take you to write one of those scripts then?
It's like books. I'm super fast. I write them in 2, maybe 3 days max.
Wow.
It's 22 pages. But again, it's like you do the layout and you look and you're like, okay, these are the beats of the story. Mm-hmm. So I do a really fast first draft and then go fill it in and add to it. And then we always have like, at the end you can look at the pages and tweak it with, make sure it makes sense with what they've done and what you've done. But no, I'm
Hmm.
probably too fast, but I don't know. It's these rushes.
You're not having to worry about every line being published prose. It's really just the dialogue that the reader is going to be seeing.
Yeah.
So I would imagine that simplifies things a little bit.
Yeah. But also comics, like it feels like you think publishing is weird until you start comics and you're like, oh, publishing. You're so simple and you make sense. Comics is the timing is weird. Like you'll turn in a script, 2 weeks will go by and you'll be like, they liked it. And then you'll get the edits the next day and you'll be like, I have a lot of work. And they're like, can you get these edits to us in 2 days? And I'm like, you took 2 weeks to read it. But you do it because that's what they want.
The first editing I ever got from a publisher was, of course, for Aragon, and the edits from my editor, who I never worked with an editor before, barely even talked with her before at this. I'd never talked with her before this, aside from on the phone once or twice. Never met her, and the edits showed up the day before Christmas.
What? And they were like, we'd like this by January 1st.
And then, of course, everyone in publishing, they're all off on holiday all the way through the new year. So I have all these questions, and I'm absolutely freaking out, and there was no one to talk to. So, all right, well, thank you so much for doing this with me today, Delilah. Is there anything I haven't asked you that I should have asked you or that you want to discuss before we wrap this up?
I really feel strongly about helping new writers find their feet. If you ask me an ungoogleable question on Twitter, I will do my best to answer it. Or even sometimes I'll tweet about it all day in a tweet stream and then kind of storify it or put it on my blog. Because when I started out, I was, I had 2 small kids. I was at home on my couch in Atlanta. Everything I know about publishing, I learned online. And every bit of help I got was free. And there's so many people waiting to prey on the hope of new authors, and I want to smash them all with my fist. So, like, if you go on my blog, which is whimsydark.com, that's all my blog is basically is writing tips, storified tweets, what to do at your first writing convention, how to get published, how to edit your first draft, how to deal with broken characters, that sort of thing. Or you can ask me on Twitter. If you want me to read your work and actually reply about it, you can take my Lit Reactor classes. I tend to teach 3 or 4 a year, usually on world building or character, but that includes 2,000 to 4,000 words of looking at your first drafts. But I'm not scary. You can talk to me. I will answer your questions. Just Google them first. Because if you ask me, like, how do I get an agent? I'm going to be like, your reaction to the test is part of the test, and you have failed, my friend.
I just heard from a reader of mine yesterday who contacted me on Twitter because they have a writing teacher who was telling them that the fan is only like 20, 21 years old, and they have a writing teacher in university who's telling them, oh, you're too old to be writing fantasy, and fantasy is horrible, and you're wasting your time, and just this incredible. I got very angry hearing this. But yeah, it's all lies, and it's incredibly destructive when people who are supposed to be mentors are out there saying this stuff to impressionable young artists who are very vulnerable to that sort of negative input. Yeah, that really got me angry.
I think Ann Leckie was tweeting about how somebody told a new artist, like, you're too old to write your first book. And Ann Leckie was like, excuse me, talk to me in my Hugo about, it was like, I didn't write a book till I was 31. You can, but yeah, so there's resources out there and there's help, but yeah, anybody can ask me on Twitter and I'll do my best to give you, what you need or point you in the right direction.
Well, and we will put links to your blog and your website and everything else and Twitter, at the bottom of this interview so that people can check that out, and I highly recommend that everyone does. Again, thank you so much for doing this interview. This was a lot of fun. Hopefully you enjoyed it as well.
I did. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you again, everyone, for watching, and I will see you next time.